In a moment of crisis, King Hezekiah of Judah faced certain death, but instead of giving up, he turned to God with a powerful prayer that changed the course of his life. Have you ever faced an impossible situation where all hope seemed lost? Hezekiah's story shows us the immense power of prayer and how it can alter our destiny. In this video, we'll dive into his story and explore how his unwavering faith and desperate plea before God led to a miraculous turnaround. This video is for anyone who's feeling stuck or overwhelmed by life's challenges. Just like Hezekiah, you can experience the life-changing power of prayer and see God move in ways you never imagined. Want to know how to pray with the same boldness and faith? This video will show you how. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps spread this message to others who need it. Let's dive in and learn how Hezekiah's prayer can inspire your own journey of faith and transformation. Hezekiah was the 13th king of Judah, known for his deep faith in God and his efforts to lead his people back to righteousness. Unlike many of the kings before him, Hezekiah was committed to removing idol worship from the land and restoring the worship of the one true God. He worked to cleanse the temple and reinstate proper religious practices, striving to guide his people in following God's commandments. His reign was marked by religious reforms that aimed to bring Judah closer to God, which made him stand out as a king who prioritized spiritual integrity. Hezekiah's reign, however, was not without immense challenges. One of the most significant threats he faced was from the Assyrian Empire, a powerful force that was conquering nations and expanding its territory. The Assyrians had already taken control of much of the surrounding region, and King Sennacherib of Assyria set his sights on Judah. The Assyrian army laid siege to Jerusalem, and it appeared that Judah's survival was uncertain. This overwhelming threat put Hezekiah and the people of Judah in a difficult position, with their future hanging in the balance. The Assyrian threat was not just a military challenge, it was also a psychological one. The Assyrians were known for their brutal tactics, and their approach to warfare was designed to strike fear into the hearts of those they attacked. Sennacherib's forces had already destroyed other cities and captured many people, and now they had surrounded Jerusalem, leaving Hezekiah with few options. The people of Judah were terrified, and their faith was tested as they faced what seemed like an inevitable defeat. Despite the overwhelming odds, Hezekiah did not panic or give up. Instead, he chose to seek God's help, demonstrating his deep trust in God's ability to deliver them. He took the step of praying and seeking the counsel of the prophet Isaiah, showing that he was not relying on his own strength or military power but on God's intervention. Hezekiah's decision to turn to God in the face of such a formidable enemy reflects his faith and determination to do what was right for his people, regardless of the external circumstances. During this time, Hezekiah also fortified the city, strengthening its defenses in preparation for a prolonged siege. He took practical steps to ensure the survival of Jerusalem, including building new water sources and strengthening the city's walls. But even as he worked to prepare for the worst, Hezekiah knew that true protection could only come from God. His reliance on God's protection during this crisis was a powerful demonstration of his faith, as he trusted that God would act on behalf of his people. The Assyrian threat brought Hezekiah face to face with the harsh realities of war and the survival of his nation. Yet, through his faith, actions, and reliance on God, Hezekiah set a powerful example for how to face seemingly impossible situations. His reign was a time of both spiritual revival and military crisis, and through it all, he remained steadfast in his trust in God, hoping for a divine intervention that would save Judah from destruction. Hezekiah faced an overwhelming situation when the Assyrian army, led by King Sennacherib, surrounded Jerusalem. The threat was real and dire. Sennacherib had already conquered many nations and mocked the God of Israel, sending a threatening letter to Hezekiah. This letter not only mocked the king but also blasphemed God, declaring that the God of Israel was no different from the gods of the other nations that had fallen before Assyria. Faced with this terrifying situation, Hezekiah was desperate. The city was under siege, the people were afraid, and their fate seemed sealed. It was in this moment of crisis that Hezekiah turned to God in prayer. Instead of responding with fear or trying to fight the Assyrians on his own, Hezekiah went to the temple of the Lord. There, he spread out the threatening letter before God, a sign of his complete dependence on God. He did not try to hide his fears or his desperation. Instead, Hezekiah poured out his heart, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation and the mockery of God. This act of laying the letter before God was an act of surrender, showing that Hezekiah trusted God more than his own strength or the military power around him. His prayer would become a powerful declaration of faith. Hezekiah's prayer was deeply significant because it recognized God's sovereignty over all nations and pleaded for God's intervention. In his prayer, Hezekiah acknowledged that God alone was the true Lord and King. He said, "Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord." Hezekiah's words were not just a plea for personal deliverance, but a desire to demonstrate to the world that the God of Israel was sovereign and powerful. He sought God's intervention not only for the salvation of his people, but for the glory of God's name. What stands out about Hezekiah's prayer is the humility with which he approached God. Hezekiah did not boast of his own ability to handle the crisis. He recognized that the situation was beyond human control. His prayer was an honest admission of weakness and a plea for divine strength. In a time of great distress, Hezekiah did not seek his own glory or the survival of Judah alone. Instead, he asked for God to deliver them in a way that would show the entire world that the God of Israel was the one true God. His focus was on God's glory, not just the safety of his people. Hezekiah's prayer also showed his deep faith in God's ability to deliver him. Though the odds were against him and Jerusalem seemed doomed, Hezekiah believed in God's power to intervene. He trusted that God could do what seemed impossible. His prayer was not just a cry of desperation, but a statement of faith in God's power and authority. This was a prayer of dependence, recognizing that only God could deliver them from the Assyrian threat. Hezekiah's example shows us the importance of turning to God with faith, even when the situation looks hopeless. The significance of Hezekiah's prayer is that it sets an example for all of us in times of crisis. Hezekiah's response to the Assyrian threat teaches us that when we face overwhelming challenges, we must turn to God in faith and humility. Like Hezekiah, we can pour out our hearts to God, acknowledging our dependence on Him and seeking His glory in the midst of our trials. Hezekiah's prayer reminds us that God is sovereign over all things, and when we seek Him, He is faithful to answer. In response to Hezekiah's heartfelt prayer, God immediately sent the prophet Isaiah to reassure him. Isaiah delivered a powerful message from God, telling Hezekiah that he had heard his prayer and would act on his behalf. God promised that he would defend Jerusalem and that the mighty Assyrian army, led by King Sennacherib, would not succeed in capturing the city. God's assurance to Hezekiah was clear: the people of Judah were not alone. God would protect them, and He would show the world His power. This message brought comfort to Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem, reaffirming their trust in God's ability to deliver them. God's response to Hezekiah's prayer was not just words of reassurance. It was followed by a powerful, miraculous act. That very night, an angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. The next morning, when the people of Jerusalem woke up, they found the Assyrian camp decimated. The once imposing army had been completely destroyed in a single night, and the rest of the Assyrian forces fled in fear. This miraculous event confirmed that God had indeed answered Hezekiah's prayer and had intervened in a way that only He could. The people of Judah had been saved, not by their own strength, but by the mighty hand of God. This miraculous deliverance was a testimony to God's power and faithfulness. It showed that, even when faced with overwhelming odds, God is always in control. The Assyrians had seemed invincible, but with a single divine intervention, God turned the tide in favor of His people. Hezekiah's prayer was answered in an extraordinary way, proving that God's promises are always true and that His power surpasses all human understanding. The people of Judah were witnesses to a miracle that solidified their trust in God's ability to protect and deliver them. The deliverance of Jerusalem was not just a military victory, it was a spiritual victory. By saving Jerusalem in such a dramatic fashion, God demonstrated his sovereignty over all nations, including the mighty Assyrians. This event served as a reminder to the people of Judah that God is the true protector of his people, and that their safety depended not on their own strength but on his grace and mercy. It was a powerful message to the surrounding nations as well, showing that the God of Israel was not to be mocked or ignored. For Hezekiah, the miracle was a confirmation of his faith and trust in God. He had prayed boldly, acknowledging God's sovereignty and asking for his intervention. In response, God answered with a clear and decisive act, demonstrating that he had heard Hezekiah's plea. The miraculous deliverance reassured Hezekiah that he had made the right choice by seeking God in his time of crisis. It also served as a powerful lesson in the effectiveness of prayer, showing that when we turn to God with faith, he is faithful to answer. The miracle that followed Hezekiah's prayer serves as an encouragement for all believers. It reminds us that God is always present and that he listens to our prayers, especially in times of crisis. Hezekiah's story shows us that God responds to prayer not only with words of comfort but also with powerful actions. When we face seemingly impossible situations, we can take comfort in knowing that God has the power to change the course of events. Just as Hezekiah experienced a miraculous victory, so too can we trust in God's ability to deliver us when we seek him with faith. Hezekiah's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of prayer, especially in times of crisis. When faced with the terrifying threat of the Assyrian army, Hezekiah could have reacted with fear or desperation. Instead, he turned to God in prayer, fully aware that his only hope for survival was in God's hands. This teaches us that in our own moments of crisis, prayer should be our first response. No matter how overwhelming the situation, we can trust that God hears our cries and is capable of intervening in ways that surpass our understanding. Prayer opens the door for God to move in our lives, just as it did for Hezekiah. The power of prayer is seen in how it shifted the course of Hezekiah's situation. When everything seemed hopeless, God answered Hezekiah's heartfelt prayer with a miraculous deliverance. Just as Hezekiah did, we can find comfort and strength when we turn to God in prayer. It's easy to get overwhelmed by challenges and feel as though there is no way out, but prayer connects us to the one who has all power to change things. Through prayer, we invite God's power into our circumstances, allowing him to work on our behalf, even in the most difficult situations. Hezekiah's faith was not in his own strength, but in God's ability to deliver him and his people. He could have relied on his military forces or tried to negotiate with the Assyrians, but instead, he trusted in God's plan. Hezekiah's example reminds us that true faith means trusting God's will, even when the situation seems impossible. When we are faced with challenges, trusting in God's sovereignty and his wisdom gives us peace. We may not always understand his plan or see the immediate results, but we can trust that God is always working for our good. In trusting God's will, Hezekiah showed us that even when we face overwhelming odds, God can still change the outcome. The Assyrian army, known for its ruthless power, seemed unbeatable. But Hezekiah didn't focus on the strength of the enemy. He focused on God's ability to change the course of events. This is a powerful lesson for us. When we place our trust in God's plan, we allow him to work in ways that might seem impossible from a human perspective. Trusting in God's power enables us to face challenges with courage, knowing that he is in control. Hezekiah also teaches us the importance of prayer in surrendering our will to God. He didn't demand God act according to his own desires, but instead prayed for God's name to be glorified. Deliver us so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are God. This selfless prayer shows that true faith in God's will isn't about personal gain, but about recognizing that God's glory is paramount. When we align our prayers with God's will, we can trust that he will act in a way that brings glory to his name. Finally, Hezekiah's prayer is a reminder that we should never underestimate the power of turning to God in prayer. In times of crisis, it can be easy to feel powerless, but prayer is our direct connection to the Almighty. Just as Hezekiah's trust in God's plan led to miraculous deliverance, so too can our prayers lead to breakthroughs in our lives. Trusting in God's will and relying on the power of prayer transforms our perspective, reminding us that God is greater than any challenge we face. Hezekiah's story is a powerful example of faith, prayer, and God's miraculous intervention. Faced with the mighty Assyrian army and the threat of certain destruction, Hezekiah did not panic or trust in his own strength. Instead, he turned to God in prayer, humbling himself and acknowledging God's sovereignty. In response, God answered Hezekiah's plea with a miraculous deliverance. He sent an angel to defeat 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, saving Jerusalem and ensuring the safety of the people of Judah. This story reminds us that no matter how difficult our situations may seem, no challenge is too big for God. Hezekiah's prayer transformed the destiny of Judah, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of turning to God in moments of crisis. Just as Hezekiah faced a powerful enemy, we, too, will face challenges that feel insurmountable. But just like Hezekiah, we are called to approach God in prayer, trusting that He can change our circumstances. The miraculous deliverance that followed Hezekiah's prayer shows that when we rely on God and trust in His power, He can intervene in ways that exceed our expectations. As we reflect on Hezekiah's life, it's important to ask ourselves, how often do we turn to God when we face overwhelming challenges? Are we quick to rely on our own strength, or do we trust in God's power and sovereignty? Hezekiah's story encourages us to pray with boldness, humility, and faith, knowing that God listens to our prayers and can change the course of our lives. His trust in God's plan should inspire us to seek God's help with the same confidence, knowing that He is always ready to answer when we call upon Him. One of the key lessons from Hezekiah's life is that prayer is not just about asking for help, it's about acknowledging God's sovereignty and trusting His will. Hezekiah's prayer was not only a request for deliverance, but also a declaration of God's greatness. He understood that God's glory was the ultimate goal, and that his prayer was an opportunity for God to demonstrate His power. We, too, should pray with the understanding that God's plan is always greater than our own, and that His ways are higher than ours. Hezekiah's story also teaches us the importance of trusting God's timing. Even when the situation seemed hopeless, God's answer came at the right time. The people of Judah had to wait, but God's response was not delayed. In our own lives, we must remember that God's timing is perfect, even if it doesn't align with our own expectations. Hezekiah's story reassures us that God will act when the time is right, and that we can trust in His perfect timing. As we conclude, let's remember that Hezekiah's story is a reminder that we can boldly approach God in prayer, especially during times of crisis. Whatever challenges we may face, we are not alone. God is always with us, ready to hear our prayers and act on our behalf. So, let Hezekiah's faith inspire us to pray with confidence and trust in God's ability to change our circumstances. What challenges in your life are you facing today that require bold prayer? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos that explore powerful lessons from the Bible.